The gunshot echoed across the darkening prairie as Rose O'Malley stumbled through the tall grass, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other clutching a small leather pouch containing everything she had managed to grab before fleeing. Blood trickled down her face from the gash above her eye, mixing with tears as she pushed forward into the unknown wilderness of 1876 Texas. Behind her lay Johnson City and the nightmare she had called home for the past 2 years. Ahead lay only uncertainty and the desperate hope of escape. Rose's legs threatened to give out with each step. The baby inside her kicked fiercely, as if sharing her terror. 3 months along and already fighting just like its mother. She glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see Vernon's silhouette on horseback pursuing her into the gathering dusk. The memory of his last beating still pulsed through her body. His rage upon discovering her packed bag, his hands around her throat when she told him she was leaving, his boot connecting with her ribs when she mentioned the baby wasn't his. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, forcing her feet forward even as exhaustion threatened to overcome her. "Keep moving or die." The distant sound of hoofbeats sent a wave of fresh panic through Rose's battered body. He was coming. Vernon always made good on his promises, and he had promised no one would ever take what belonged to him. She quickened her pace as much as her condition would allow, but there was nowhere to hide on the open plain stretching between Johnson City and the forested hills beyond. Rose spotted a small cluster of rocks and dove behind them, making herself as small as possible. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slower. She held her breath, pressing her forehead against the cool stone and praying for invisibility. "Hello," a man's voice called out, deep and unfamiliar. "Is someone out here?" Rose remained silent, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. "I saw you from the ridge," the voice continued. "I mean no harm. Are you hurt?" She pressed deeper into the shadow of the rocks. "Madam, there's a storm coming in from the west. It's not safe out here." The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but Rose had learned the hard way that men's kindness often came with a price. Still, she was bleeding, pregnant, and would likely die exposed to the elements if the approaching storm was as bad as he claimed. With trembling hands, she eased herself up just enough to peer over the rocks. The man sat atop a chestnut stallion, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat. In the fading light, she could see he wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, not the fine suit Vernon wore as Johnson City's most prosperous businessman and secret monster. "He'll kill me if he finds me," Rose said, her voice barely audible. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and approached slowly, hands visible at his sides. As he drew closer, Rose could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 years, with kind eyes that narrowed with concern when they took in her battered face. "I'm Yates Harrington," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I work at the Triple R Ranch north of here." "Who did this to you?" "My husband," Rose replied, the word bitter on her tongue. "He'll be looking for me. He always finds me." Yates glanced toward Johnson City, then back at Rose, his decision evident in the determined set of his jaw. "Not this time." "Come with me." "Why would you help me?" Rose asked, suspicion mingling with desperation. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Yates replied, his eyes lingering on her bruised face, then dropping briefly to her protective hand over her belly. "No woman deserves this, no child either." A crack of thunder rolled across the darkening sky. Yates extended his hand. "The storm's almost here. My cabin's about an hour's ride north. It's isolated, safe." Rose hesitated only a moment before accepting his hand. What choice did she have? Stay and face Vernon or the storm, or trust this stranger who had stopped when others would have ridden past? Yates helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, his arms creating a secure cage around her without touching her more than necessary. "I'm Rose," she said as they rode away from Johnson City. "Rose O'Malley." "Hold tight, Rose O'Malley," Yates replied as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. "I'll get you somewhere safe." The rain came hard and fast, drenching them both within minutes. Rose shivered, both from cold and fear. Yates urged his horse forward through the worsening conditions, one arm steady around Rose to keep her from slipping. Despite her terror, exhaustion soon overcame her, and she found herself leaning back against the solid warmth of the cowboy's chest, her eyes growing heavy. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, Yates was gently shaking her shoulder. "We're here, Mrs. O'Malley." "Just Rose," she corrected automatically. "I'm not going back to him. Ever." Yates nodded and helped her down from the horse. Through the curtain of rain, Rose could make out the shape of a small cabin nestled against a hillside, nearly invisible among the trees. It was simple but solid, with a small covered porch and chimney. Nowhere near as grand as Vernon's house in town, but lacking all the terrible memories. Inside, Yates quickly lit a lamp and stoked the banked fire in the stone fireplace. The cabin was sparse but clean: a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, a bed in one corner, and what looked like a workbench along one wall. Books lined a rough-hewn shelf, surprising Rose. Pelts and simple curtains softened the space, making it feel more like a home than she would have expected for a bachelor cowboy. "You live here alone?" Rose asked, hugging herself as water dripped from her clothes onto the wooden floor. "Yes, madam. I prefer the solitude," Yates replied. "The ranch owner lets his hands live where they please so long as we're there when needed. I built this place myself 3 years ago." He disappeared behind a screen in the corner and returned with a clean shirt and pair of trousers. "These will be too big, but they're dry. There's a wash basin back there. I'll tend to my horse and give you privacy." When Yates returned, Rose had changed into his clothes, which indeed swallowed her slender frame, and had managed to wash the blood from her face. With the dirt removed, the extent of her injuries was more visible: a split lip, the cut above her eye that had finally stopped bleeding, and bruises in the unmistakable shape of fingerprints around her neck. Yates' expression darkened, but he said nothing as he hung his wet coat by the door and moved to prepare some food. The silence between them was heavy with unasked questions. "It wasn't always like this," Rose finally said, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "Vernon was charming when we first met. My father had just died, leaving debts. Vernon offered security, respectability. By the time I saw what he truly was, it was too late." Yates placed a bowl of simple stew in front of her. "Eat," he said gently. "You need your strength. For yourself and the little one." Rose looked up, surprised at the tenderness in his voice. "You don't mind. Many would say I deserved what I got for carrying another man's child. No one deserves to be beaten," Yates stated firmly. "Least of all someone carrying a new life. Your choices are your own, and not for me to judge." They ate in silence for a while, the storm raging outside making the cabin feel like the only safe place in the world. Rose found herself studying Yates when he wasn't looking: his strong hands as he broke bread, the quiet confidence in his movements, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met the collar of his shirt. "Who is he?" Yates asked suddenly. "Your husband. I should know who might come looking." "Vernon O'Malley," Rose replied, watching Yates' expression carefully. "He owns the bank in Johnson City and half the businesses. People respect him, fear him. No one ever questioned why his wife always seemed to have accidents." Recognition flickered in Yates' eyes. "I've seen him in town." Never liked the way he looked at people like they were beneath him. "That's Vernon," Rose said bitterly. "Everyone's beneath him, especially his wife, when he found out about the baby, when he realized it wasn't his." She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "He can't have children," she explained after a moment. "He blamed me for years, but I eventually learned the truth from his first wife before she left town. When he discovered I was pregnant, he knew. I'd planned to leave quietly, start fresh somewhere he couldn't find me, but he caught me packing." Yates listened intently, his brow furrowed. "The father of your child," Rose's eyes filled with tears. "A kind man passing through town. He doesn't know and he's long gone. It was brief, but gentle. Nothing like with Vernon. I just wanted to feel something good before I died inside completely." "I understand loneliness," Yates said softly. "But now you need rest. You can take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire." Rose began to protest, but exhaustion won out. As she settled into Yates' bed, surrounded by the unfamiliar but comforting scent of pine and leather that seemed to cling to everything he owned, she found herself wondering about this quiet cowboy who had risked himself to help a stranger. "Thank you," she whispered into the dimness of the cabin. "Sleep now," came the gentle reply. "You're safe tonight." For the first time in years, Rose believed it might be true. The storm lasted through the night and well into the next day, keeping them confined to the cabin. Rose slept late, her body desperately needing rest to heal. When she finally woke, she found Yates whittling by the fire, a half-formed wooden horse taking shape under his careful knife. "You have skilled hands," she observed, watching how precisely he worked the wood. Yates looked up, a hint of color touching his cheeks at her attention. "Just a way to pass the time. How are you feeling?" "Sore," Rose admitted, sitting up gingerly, "but better than yesterday. There's coffee and I made some breakfast. It's nothing fancy." Rose accepted the coffee gratefully, savoring the warmth and bitter strength of it. As they ate, she found herself asking Yates about his life, eager to focus on something other than her own troubles. "How does a man who reads Shakespeare and carves like an artist end up a cowboy in the wilds of Texas?" she asked, nodding toward the books on his shelf. A small smile touched Yates' lips. "My father was a schoolteacher back east, wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I had different ideas. Came west after the war, looking for open spaces and honest work. Found I had a way with horses and the rest followed." "You miss your family." "They're gone now," he said simply. "Father died of consumption when I was 17. Mother followed a year later, no siblings." "I'm sorry," Rose said, recognizing the familiar shadow of loss that crossed his face. "It was a long time ago," Yates replied. "What about you?" "Any family who might help you?" Rose shook her head. "My mother died when I was young. My father raised me alone until his death 2 years ago. That's when I married Vernon more for survival than love, though I thought affection might grow with time." She laughed bitterly. "How wrong I was." The rain continued to drum on the roof, creating a cocoon of isolation around them. Rose helped Yates with small chores around the cabin, grateful for the normalcy of domestic tasks after the terror of the previous night. They moved around each other carefully, two strangers forced into intimacy by circumstance. When evening fell, Yates checked her wound and applied a salve he made himself from herbs he'd gathered. His touch was gentle, clinical, yet Rose found herself holding her breath at the brush of his fingertips against her skin. "Tomorrow I need to ride into town," he said as he finished. "We need supplies and I should see if there's talk about you." Fear clutched at Rose's heart. "He'll be looking for me. He might recognize you." "I doubt it," Yates assured her. "I'm just another cowhand to men like O'Malley. I'll be careful, keep my head down and listen. We need to know what we're facing." "We." Rose caught the word immediately. Yates met her eyes steadily. "I won't send you back to him and I won't abandon you. Not unless you want me to." The simple declaration brought fresh tears to Rose's eyes. "Why? Why risk yourself for me?" Yates was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turning toward the fire. "My mother," he finally said, his voice low. "She married a different man after my father died. He was not kind. I was too young, too weak to protect her. I couldn't save her then, but I can help you now." Rose reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry and grateful." That night, as she lay in his bed once again while Yates made himself comfortable on a bedroll near the fire, Rose realized how quickly this cabin had begun to feel like a sanctuary. The rhythm of Yates breathing across the room was strangely comforting, the sound of another human who meant her no harm, who had opened his home to her without expectation. She wondered, as sleep claimed her, what it might be like to live in a place where fear didn't permeate every corner. To share a life with someone like Yates Harrington, whose strength was evident not in his fists but in his quiet compassion. Just dreams, she told herself. Just foolish, impossible dreams. The rain stopped overnight, leaving the world outside washed clean and glistening in the morning sun. Yates prepared to ride into Johnson City, giving Rose instructions on barring the door behind him and where to find his rifle if needed. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised, settling his hat on his head. "Stay inside, stay quiet." Rose watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse and rode away, anxiety building in her chest as his figure grew smaller in the distance. She was alone again, vulnerable. What if Vernon had men searching the countryside? What if they found the cabin while Yates was gone? To distract herself, Rose set about cleaning the already tidy cabin, then explored the small root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the floor. She found jars of preserved vegetables and fruits, dried meat, and other staples, evidence of Yates' self-sufficiency and preparation. By midday, restlessness drove her outside to the small covered porch. The cabin was well positioned, she noticed, offering a view of the approaching trail while remaining partially hidden among the trees. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, so different from the stifling perfumed parlor Vernon had insisted she maintain. Rose had just returned inside when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Relief flooded through her. Yates was back early. But when she peered through the window, ice formed in her veins. It wasn't Yates. The rider was one of Vernon's men, Sam Dutton, who worked as a bouncer at the saloon Vernon owned. He was slowly making his way up the trail, his eyes scanning the landscape. Rose dropped to the floor beneath the window, heart pounding. Had he seen her? Was he searching cabins in the area? Or was it horrible coincidence? With trembling hands, Rose crawled to where Yates had shown her his rifle was kept. She'd fired a gun before her father had insisted she learn, but the thought of using it against another person made her stomach turn. Still, for her child, she would do what was necessary. The sound of hooves stopped. Then, after what seemed an eternity, they continued past the cabin and up the trail. Rose remained frozen until the sounds faded entirely before allowing herself to breathe again. They were looking for her. Vernon was not giving up. When Yates finally returned as the sun was setting, Rose nearly collapsed with relief. He dismounted quickly when he saw her face. "What happened?" he demanded, taking her by the shoulders and scanning for new injuries. Rose told him about Dutton's near discovery, watching as Yates' expression grew increasingly grim. "It's as I feared," he said, leading her back inside and securing the door. "The whole town's talking about it. O'Malley's put out word that his fragile, confused wife has run away in a delicate condition. He's offering a reward for information leading to her safe return." "Fragile and confused," Rose repeated bitterly. "That's how he explains the bruises when people notice. I'm clumsy. I'm unstable." I fall. Yates unloaded supplies from his saddlebag's food, some fabric, a small bottle of medicine. There's more. He's claiming the baby isn't his, that you've been unfaithful, but that he's willing to forgive you for the sake of your marriage vows if you return voluntarily. Rose sank into a chair, her hand protectively covering her stomach, making himself the wronged but merciful husband. Of course. Most seem to believe him, Yates continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. But I did hear whispers. A woman at the general store, Martha Jenkins, she asked the shopkeeper if anyone had questioned the bruises on Mrs. O'Malley's arms last Sunday at church. He shushed her quickly. A spark of hope flared in Rose's chest. Martha had always been kind to her, offering small smiles of sympathy when Vernon wasn't looking. Did anyone see you taking an interest in the gossip? No, Yates assured her. I kept to my usual business, just another cowhand stocking up on supplies. But Rose. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He has men watching the roads out of town. He's determined to find you. What am I going to do? Rose whispered, the brief hope extinguished. I can't keep hiding here forever, imposing on your kindness, but I can't leave the area without being caught. And once this baby comes. Yates knelt before her, his eyes level with hers. You're not imposing. You can stay as long as you need to. We'll figure out a way to get you safely away from here, I promise. But it might take time. The intensity in his gaze made Rose's breath catch. There was determination there, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster for reasons entirely unrelated to fear. Thank you, she said softly. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Live free, Yates replied simply. That's repayment enough. That evening, as they shared a meal, Rose found herself opening up about her life before Vernon, her childhood on a small farm, her father's work as a farrier, her dreams of someday teaching school. Yates listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. In return, he told her about his years drifting through the West, working on various ranches, the characters he'd met, the landscapes he'd seen. His voice was rich with appreciation for the beauty of the open country, and Rose found herself entranced by his descriptions. I'd like to see those places someday, she said wistfully. The mountains in Colorado, the desert at sunset. I've never been more than 50 miles from where I was born. You will, Yates promised. Once it's safe, once we figure out how to get you away from here, the whole country will be open to you. Rose smiled at his optimism, though doubt lingered. Vernon's reach was long, his resources extensive, and his pride wouldn't allow him to simply let her disappear. But for tonight, in the warmth of Yates' cabin, with the gentle cadence of his voice washing over her, she allowed herself to believe in possibilities. Later, as she drifted toward sleep, Rose realized that for the first time in years, she had spent an entire day without fear as her constant companion. Instead, there had been moments of peace, of genuine conversation, even flickers of joy. All because of a cowboy with kind eyes who had stopped when others would have passed by. Days stretched into a week, and Rose fell into a rhythm of life at the cabin. Her bruises began to fade, and the constant tension in her shoulders gradually eased. Yates taught her the patterns of wildlife around the cabin, which birds heralded dawn, how the foxes hunted in the meadow below, when the deer came to the nearby stream. Yates rode into town twice more, always returning with the same news. Vernon was still searching, still spreading his story of a confused wife in need of her husband's protection. The reward for information had increased. We need to be more careful, Yates warned after his last trip. I've noticed men I don't recognize in town, hired guns possibly, and there are more people searching the outlying areas. Rose's fear, temporarily subdued, rushed back with renewed force. Perhaps I should leave, head north or west on my own. You've already risked too much. That's exactly what would get you caught, Yates argued. A woman alone would draw attention immediately. No, we need a better plan. That night, as they sat before the fire, Yates proposed something unexpected. The ranch is sending a herd north to Kansas next week. I'm supposed to go with them. Rose looked up sharply. You're leaving. We both could, he said carefully. If you were my wife, no one would question you traveling with me. We could join the cattle drive, then continue north once we reach Kansas. By then, the trail would be cold. Your wife. Rose repeated, heat rising to her cheeks. In name only, Yates clarified quickly. Just a story to explain your presence. Once we're far enough away, you could go your own way if you wished, but it would give us a way out of Texas without raising suspicions. The plan was logical, practical. Yet something in Rose recoiled at the deception, not because it was wrong, but because it felt too close to desires she'd been trying to suppress. In the quiet days they'd shared, she had found herself watching Yates as he worked the strength in his shoulders as he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands as he tended a bird with a broken wing. They'd found the quiet concentration on his face as he read by lamplight. I'm still legally married, she reminded him, though Vernon's claim on her felt more like shackles than a bond. A problem for another day, Yates acknowledged. But first, we need to get you safely away from here. Will you trust me with this plan? Trust. Such a simple word for something so profound. Rose had trusted Vernon once to her eternal regret, but Yates had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. He had opened his home, shared his food, risked his reputation and safety, all for a woman he barely knew. Yes, she said finally. I trust you. The relief in Yates' smile made her heart turn over. Good, we'll leave in 3 days. I need to make arrangements, get supplies. But Rose, he hesitated, his expression serious. Once we commit to this, there's no turning back. If O'Malley discovers I helped you, he won't stop at just finding you. Rose understood the weight of what he was saying. Yates was putting his life on the line for her. The thought brought both immense gratitude and terrible guilt. Are you certain you want to do this? She asked. You could still walk away. Tell them you found me if they ask. Claim the reward. No one would blame you. Anger flashed in Yates' normally calm eyes. Is that what you think of me? That I would sell you back to a man who treats you worse than most men treat their dogs? No, Rose said quickly, reaching for his hand. No, that's not what I meant. I don't want you to throw your life away for someone you barely know. Yates' expression softened, and he turned his hand to hold hers properly. I know enough, Rose O'Malley. I know you're brave and strong. I know you deserve better than what life has given you so far. And I know I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to help you find it. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. For a long moment they sat in silence, hands joined across the table, the fire crackling in the hearth the only sound in the cabin. 3 days, Rose finally said. What do we need to do? Preparation consumed the next 2 days. Yates rode to the ranch to confirm his place on the cattle drive, and subtly introduced the idea that he had a wife who would be joining him. He returned with clothes borrowed from the ranch owner's daughter who had recently married and left behind items that would fit Rose's slender frame. Martha Thornton sends these with her compliments, Yates said, presenting the bundle. I told her my wife was of similar build. She seemed pleased to know they'd be used. Rose ran her fingers over the simple but well-made dresses, thinking of the fine gowns hanging in her closet at Vernon's house. Those dresses had been cages disguised as finery symbols of his ownership rather than gifts of affection. How did you explain suddenly having a wife? She asked, curious about his story. Yates looked slightly embarrassed. I said we'd married recently in San Antonio where you have family. It's far enough away that no one is likely to question it. Rose nodded, appreciating the care he was taking with their deception. And my appearance. My condition will be noticeable. I said you're expecting our first child due in winter, Yates replied, a flush touching his cheeks. The timing. It works with your actual condition. The thought of passing her child off as Yates brought complex emotions. On one hand, it was a necessary deception for their safety. On the other, it created an intimacy between them that existed only in fiction, a shared joy in new life, a commitment to family that transcended the practical arrangement they had made. What name should I use? Rose asked, realizing she couldn't keep O'Malley. Yates considered for a moment. You could use my mother's maiden name, Rose Bennett. Simple, easy to remember. And you'll introduce me as Mrs. Harrington, Yates said, the words causing something to shift in the atmosphere between them. Rose Harrington. Rose turned away, unpacking the clothes to hide the blush she felt rising to her cheeks. Rose Harrington, she repeated softly, testing the name on her tongue. It felt right in a way that surprised her. On the final day before their departure, while Yates was making last-minute preparations at the ranch, Rose heard hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Panic seized her as she peered through the window and saw two riders making their way up the trail, neither of them Yates. Heart hammering, she grabbed the rifle and retreated to the root cellar, pulling the trapdoor closed above her. The space was cramped and dark, smelling of earth and preserved foods. Rose positioned herself with the rifle aimed at the trapdoor, trying to control her breathing as she heard the men enter the cabin above. Place looks lived in, a gruff voice observed. Harrington's supposed to be joining the drive tomorrow. Might just be getting things in order. Check everything, another voice commanded. O'Malley said his wife might seek help from men living alone outside town. She's in a delicate condition, not thinking clearly. Rose bit her lip to keep from making a sound, rage and fear battling within her at hearing Vernon's lies repeated. She listened as the men moved around the cabin, opening cupboards, searching through Yates' belongings. Nothing here that suggests a woman, the first voice reported. Just the usual bachelor cowboy setup. What about this? The second voice asked. Women's clothing, hidden but not well enough. Rose closed her eyes in dismay. They had found the bundle of clothes Martha Thornton had sent, which Rose had been altering to better fit her changing body. She hadn't thought to conceal them, assuming no one would enter the cabin in their absence. Interesting, the second voice mused. Very interesting indeed. O'Malley will want to know about this. The men continued searching but found nothing else incriminating. Rose remained frozen in the cellar until long after they departed, terrified they might be waiting outside to see if anyone emerged. Only when she heard Yates calling her name did she finally push open the trapdoor, trembling with relief and residual fear. They found the clothes, she told him after explaining what had happened. They know a woman has been here. Yates' expression hardened. We need to leave. Now. Tonight. If they report back to O'Malley, he'll connect the pieces quickly enough. The cattle drive doesn't leave until tomorrow, Rose reminded him. We're not waiting for the cattle drive, Yates decided. We'll head east first to throw them off, then circle north toward Kansas on our own. I know these lands better than O'Malley's men. The urgency in his voice convinced Rose that their carefully laid plans had just collapsed. How soon can we be ready? An hour, Yates replied, already gathering essentials. Take only what you can carry easily. We'll travel light and fast. As Rose hurriedly packed the few possessions she had accumulated, a new fear took hold. Yates, if Vernon discovers you helped me, he won't just be angry, he'll want revenge. Yates paused in his preparations, meeting her worried gaze with steady resolve. I knew the risks when I brought you here, Rose. I don't regret it. But your home, your job are things, he interrupted gently. Just things. Your life and your child's life, those matter more. In that moment, with the golden light of sunset streaming through the cabin windows and illuminating Yates' determined face, Rose felt something shift irrevocably within her heart. This man, this quiet cowboy with books on his shelves and kindness in his hands, had become more than her rescuer. He had become essential. Night had fallen by the time they were ready to depart. Rose wore one of Martha Thornton's dresses with a warm shawl Yates had procured. Her hair was pinned up under a bonnet, transforming her from battered runaway to respectable woman. Yates had loaded essential supplies onto his horse and a small pack mule he kept for longer journeys. "Stay close," he instructed as he helped her mount. "We'll avoid the main trails. If we're stopped, you're my wife and we're traveling to visit your ailing mother. Let me do most of the talking." Rose nodded, gathering her courage as they set off into the darkness. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, its door left ajar as if its owner had stepped out momentarily rather than fled. Rose glanced back once, memorizing the silhouette of the place that had been her sanctuary, wondering if either of them would ever see it again. They rode through the night, Yates leading them on game trails and cattle paths rather than established roads. Rose, exhausted but determined, focused on staying upright in the saddle as they traversed increasingly unfamiliar terrain. The moon provided just enough light to navigate, though Yates seemed to know the way instinctively. "How do you know where we're going?" Rose asked during a brief rest to water the horses. "I explored most of these hills my first year here," Yates explained. "I prefer knowing the land I live on. There's an old trapper's cabin about 10 miles ahead. We can rest there tomorrow during daylight, then continue east after nightfall." By dawn, they had reached the cabin, little more than a one-room shelter with a partially collapsed roof. It offered concealment, however, which was all they needed. Yates insisted Rose sleep first while he kept watch, and despite her protests, exhaustion claimed her quickly. She woke to the smell of coffee and found Yates sitting just inside the doorway, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the valley below. "Any sign of pursuit?" she asked, joining him with a cup of the strong coffee he offered. "Nothing yet, but they'll be looking by now." He glanced at her with concern. "How are you feeling? This can't be good for you or the baby." Rose placed a protective hand over the gentle swell of her stomach. "We're managing. This little one is stubborn like its mother." A ghost of a smile touched Yates' lips. "Good. We'll need that stubbornness in the days ahead." They rested through the day, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. As dusk approached, they prepared to continue their journey. Yates had just finished saddling the horses when he suddenly went still, head cocked toward the valley. "Riders," he said quietly. "At least 3 moving fast on the main trail below." Rose felt her heart skip. "Looking for us, most likely. We need to change our plan." Yates quickly began adjusting their packs. "We'll head north now instead of continuing east. There's a pass through these hills that's difficult to find unless you know it's there." They set off as the first stars appeared, staying off the ridgelines to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through the most treacherous sections. Rose's muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed forward, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Near midnight, they reached the pass Yates had mentioned, a narrow gap between towering rock formations that was indeed nearly invisible until they were upon it. Beyond lay a valley Rose had never seen, stretching north toward the distant promise of Kansas and freedom. "We'll make camp here," Yates decided, finding a sheltered spot among the rocks. "The horses need rest and so do you." Too exhausted to argue, Rose helped set up their minimal camp. They ate cold rations, unwilling to risk a fire that might be spotted. Despite her fatigue, Rose found sleep elusive, her mind racing with worries about what lay ahead and regret for having drawn Yates into her dangerous situation. "I can hear you thinking," Yates said softly from where he sat keeping watch. Rose turned toward his voice in the darkness. "I was thinking about all you've given up because of me. Your home, your livelihood, your peace." "Peace is overrated if it's built on ignoring injustice," Yates replied. "As for the rest, I've started over before. I can do it again." "Where will you go after?" She couldn't finish the thought. Yates was quiet for a long moment. "I haven't decided. North, maybe, or west to California. Somewhere with open spaces and honest work." An ache formed in Rose's chest at the thought of Yates continuing his solitary existence after their paths eventually diverged. She had come to depend on his steady presence, his quiet strength, his gentle consideration. The idea of facing the future without him was suddenly, unexpectedly painful. "What about you?" he asked. "Where will you go once we reach Kansas?" Rose had thought about little else during her early days at Yates' cabin. "Denver, perhaps. I've heard it's growing quickly. A woman alone might find work there, blend in among the new arrivals." "A woman with a child," Yates reminded her gently. "Yes." Rose's hand moved to her stomach. "That complicates things, but I'll manage. Women have faced worse and survived." "You shouldn't have to just survive, Rose," Yates said, his voice taking on an intensity that surprised her. "You deserve to live to thrive. You and your child both." The sincerity in his words brought tears to Rose's eyes, invisible in the darkness. "Thank you for believing that. It's been a long time since anyone thought I deserved anything good." Silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Yates spoke again, his voice careful, measured. "You know, two can face the world more easily than one, especially when one of them will be caring for a child." Rose's breath caught. "What are you saying, Yates?" "I'm saying," he continued slowly, "that our arrangement, our pretense of being husband and wife, it doesn't have to end in Kansas if you don't want it to." Her heart thundered in her chest. "You do that. Take responsibility for another man's child. Tie yourself to a woman you barely know." "I know enough," Yates said, echoing his words from days earlier. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you laugh at my poor jokes and can recite Wordsworth from memory. I know you're determined to give your child a better life than the one you've had. Those are things worth knowing about a person." Rose was grateful for the darkness that hid the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "And what about love?" she whispered. "Shouldn't marriage have that?" Yates moved closer, his figure a shadow in the night. "I believe love can grow where respect and kindness have prepared the soil." "I respect you, Rose O'Malley, and I find myself caring for you more each day. Is that enough to start with?" The honesty of his answer moved her deeply. Vernon had professed passionate love from the beginning, but his actions had revealed the lie. Yates offered no pretty falsehoods, only the truth of his growing feelings and the promise of his steady character. "It's more than enough," she replied softly. He reached for her hand in the darkness, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. They sat that way for a long time, hands joined, watching the stars wheel overhead and contemplating a future that suddenly held new possibilities. Morning brought renewed vigilance. They set off at first light, making good progress through the valley. Yates estimated they would reach the Kansas territory in 4 days if they maintained their pace. The knowledge that they were putting distance between themselves and Vernon's influence with each passing mile lifted Rose's spirits, despite the physical demands of their journey. On the 3rd day, they encountered their first serious obstacle, a swollen river. its waters high from recent rains. The crossing Yates had planned to use was submerged, the current swift and dangerous. We'll have to go west a few miles, Yates decided after scouting the banks. There's a place where the river widens and slows. It will delay us by half a day. The detour took them closer to more traveled routes than Yates would have preferred, but they had no choice. As they rode, Rose noticed a change in his demeanor, more alert, his hand often straying to the rifle secured to his saddle. "What is it?" she finally asked. "Just being cautious," he replied, though his expression suggested more. "I've had a feeling since this morning that we're not alone out here." The words sent a chill through Rose. "Vernon's men, or just travelers on the same route," Yates said, trying to sound reassuring. "But until we know for certain, we stay vigilant." They reached the wider crossing by late afternoon. The river here was broad but shallower, with a gravel bottom that provided surer footing for the horses. Yates tested the depth first before leading Rose and the pack mule across. The water reached the horses' bellies but no higher, and they made the crossing without incident. On the far bank, Yates suggested they continue until dark rather than making camp immediately. "I still can't shake the feeling we're being followed," he explained. "I'd rather put more distance between us and the river crossing." They pushed on through the gathering twilight, the terrain becoming increasingly wooded as they moved north. Just as Yates was about to suggest they stop for the night, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree inches from Rose's head. "Down," Yates commanded, leaping from his horse and pulling Rose from her saddle in one fluid motion. They took cover behind a fallen log as two more shots tore through the foliage around them. "O'Malley's men," Rose gasped, her body trembling with fear and adrenaline. Yates nodded grimly, returning fire to force their attackers to seek cover. "They must have guessed our direction after we left the cabin. How many do you see?" Rose peered cautiously around their shelter. "I count 3. There." She pointed to movement among the trees about 100 yards away. "Stay down," Yates instructed, positioning himself to better defend their position. "When I tell you run for those rocks to our left, I'll cover you." "I won't leave you," Rose protested. "You're not," Yates assured her, "but I need you somewhere more defensible. On my signal now." Rose darted toward the rocks as Yates laid down covering fire. She reached the shelter of the boulders just as another volley of bullets tore into the log where they had been hiding. Yates followed moments later, sliding into cover beside her. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No," Rose replied, her breath coming in rapid gasps. "I'm fine, but we're pinned down and night's coming. We need to hold out until dark, then try to slip away." The gunmen seemed content to wait, conserving ammunition with only occasional shots to keep Yates and Rose pinned. As the light faded, Yates outlined his plan. "Our horses have scattered, but they won't go far. Once it's fully dark, we'll move north through the trees. There's a ridge about half a mile from here where we can get a better defensive position if needed." Rose nodded, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "I'm ready." Darkness finally enveloped the forest. Yates took Rose's hand, and they began to move silently away from their shelter, using the trees and underbrush for cover. They had gone perhaps 200 yards when a voice called out from the darkness behind them. "That's far enough, Harrington." Yates pushed Rose behind him, raising his rifle toward the sound. "Who's there?" A match flared, illuminating the face of Sam Dutton, the man Rose had seen searching near Yates' cabin. "Mr. O'Malley wants his wife back. Hand her over and you might live through the night." "She's not going anywhere with you," Yates replied, his voice cold with determination. Dutton chuckled, the sound chilling in the darkness. "Look around you, Cowboy. You're surrounded. 3 guns against 1 and a woman to protect. Those aren't odds I'd bet on. I'm not his property, Rose called out, stepping up beside Yates despite his attempt to keep her shielded. I'm a person, not a possession to be retrieved. Mrs. O'Malley, Dutton's voice took on a false gentleness, your husband is worried sick. He understands you're not thinking clearly in your condition. Come home and all will be forgiven. Forgiven? Rose's voice rose in indignation. For what? For trying to escape a man who uses his fists instead of words. For protecting my child from his rage. She felt Yates tense beside her, ready to act if any of the men moved closer. That's enough talk, another voice growled from the darkness. Grab her. O'Malley said the cowboy's expendable. Rose felt Yates' hand tighten on her arm, pulling her backward as the men began to advance. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. A shot rang out and Yates jerked beside her, a grunt of pain escaping his lips as he stumbled. Yates, Rose cried, reaching for him as he struggled to remain standing. Run, he gasped, pushing her away. Get to the ridge, I'll hold them off. No, Rose refused to move, supporting him as blood darkened his shirt. Not without you. Another shot cracked through the night, followed by a cry of pain, but this time not from Yates. One of Vernon's men fell, clutching his shoulder. A new voice called out from the darkness behind Rose and Yates. Drop your weapons. Texas Rangers. Confusion erupted as more riders appeared, surrounding Vernon's men. Rose clung to Yates, who was leaning heavily against her now, his breath coming in labored gasps. Help! She called to the newcomers. He's been shot. A tall man in a dust-covered coat approached, the silver star on his chest catching what little light remained. Madam, he acknowledged with a tip of his hat before turning his attention to Yates. Let's get him to the ground, assess the damage. As they lowered Yates to the forest floor, Rose frantically explained their situation, her escape from Vernon, Yates' help, their flight north. The ranger listened impassively as he examined Yates' wound. Bullet went through the shoulder, he finally announced. Missed anything vital from the looks of it, but he's lost blood. We need to get him somewhere to tend it properly. Are you arresting us? Rose asked, fear creeping into her voice. The ranger's weathered face softened slightly. No, madam, we've been tracking these men for 2 days. They're wanted for the murder of a rancher north of Johnson City, a man who refused to sell his land to Vernon O'Malley. He nodded toward Dutton, who was now disarmed and under guard. Your husband's dealings have finally caught the law's attention. Relief washed over Rose, followed immediately by renewed concern for Yates, who was pale but conscious. He needs a doctor. There's a settlement about 10 miles north, the ranger replied. Not much, but they have someone with medical training. We'll take you there. With careful efficiency, the rangers fashioned a travois for Yates and recovered their scattered horses. Rose rode beside Yates, watching his face for any sign of worsening condition. Despite his pain, he reached for her hand. Looks like our luck has turned, he murmured. Rest, she instructed, squeezing his fingers gently. Save your strength. The settlement turned out to be little more than a trading post with a few cabins clustered nearby, but as promised, it had a former army surgeon who knew his business. He extracted fragments of cloth from Yates' wound, cleaned and stitched it, then administered laudanum for the pain. He'll recover, the doctor assured Rose after Yates had fallen into a drug-induced sleep. Keep him still for at least a week, then limited movement for another 2. The bullet went clean through muscle, missed the bone. He's fortunate. The ranger who had helped them, who introduced himself as Captain James Braddock, arranged for Rose and Yates to stay in a small cabin belonging to the trading post owner. He seemed genuinely sympathetic to Rose's situation. We've suspected O'Malley of various illegal activities for some time, Braddock explained as Rose sat by Yates' bedside. but he's been careful, covering his tracks. This is the first solid evidence we've had against him. Will I have to testify?" Rose asked, dread forming in her stomach at the thought of facing Vernon in a courtroom. "Eventually, perhaps," Braddock admitted, "but not immediately. For now, your witness is under protection. I suggest you stay here until your friend is well enough to travel, then continue to Kansas as planned." After the captain left, promising to return in a few days, Rose sat in the quiet cabin, watching Yates' chest rise and fall in sleep. The events of the past hours seemed unreal: the gunfight, the timely arrival of the Rangers, the news that Vernon was finally facing justice for at least some of his crimes. And Yates, brave, steadfast Yates, had nearly died protecting her. The thought sent a wave of emotion through her so powerful it left her breathless. She took his hand, pressing it between both of hers. "I won't leave you," she whispered, "just as you didn't leave me." Days passed in the little settlement, which Rose learned was called Coopersville after the trading post's owner. Yates improved steadily, moving from feverish sleep to alert awareness, though the pain still limited his movements. Rose rarely left his side, tending his wound, reading to him from books borrowed from the doctor, talking about their plans for the future. A week after their arrival, Captain Braddock returned with news that changed everything. "Vernon O'Malley is dead," he announced without preamble when Rose met him outside the cabin. Rose felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Dead? How?" "Resisted arrest," Braddock explained. "When we arrived with warrants, he pulled a gun. One of my men had no choice." Rose sank onto a nearby bench, emotions tumbling through her: relief, shock, a strange sense of grief, not for Vernon himself, but for all that might have been different in their marriage had he been a different man. "There's more," Braddock continued. "With O'Malley gone, several people have come forward with information about his activities, including abuse of his wife." His eyes met Rose's with understanding. "Your friend Martha Jenkins was particularly vocal about the bruises she'd seen." "She was always kind," Rose murmured. "There's the matter of O'Malley's estate," Braddock went on. "As his widow, you're entitled to—" "I want none of it," Rose interrupted firmly. "Let it go to those he wronged if possible. I want nothing from him but my freedom." Braddock nodded, respect evident in his expression. "As you wish, though legally it may take time to arrange. You're free to go where you please now, Mrs. O'Malley. Your husband's men have been arrested or fled. No one will pursue you any more." After Braddock departed, Rose entered the cabin to find Yates awake and sitting up, clearly having heard everything through the open window. "You're free," he said simply. Rose sat beside him on the edge of the bed. "Yes, it seems unreal. What will you do now?" Yates asked, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "That depends," Rose replied, her heart racing. "Do you remember what you said the night before we were attacked, about our arrangement not having to end in Kansas?" Yates' eyes softened. "I remember every word." "Did you mean it?" Rose asked, needing certainty now more than ever. "Or was it just the circumstances, feeling responsible for me, wanting to help?" "Rose," Yates said, taking her hand in his good one, "I've lived alone most of my adult life. I thought I preferred it that way. Then you came into my cabin, bruised and frightened, and somehow in helping you, I found something I didn't know I was missing." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I meant every word. I'm not asking out of obligation or pity. I'm asking because these weeks with you, despite all the danger and uncertainty, have been the most meaningful of my life." Tears welled in Rose's eyes. "Even with another man's child, that child is part of you," Yates said firmly. "And I already care for it because of that. I'll raise it as my own if you'll let me." Rose looked into the face of this man who had risked everything for her: his home, his life, his future, and saw nothing but sincerity and growing affection. Not the obsessive possession Vernon had called love, but something steadier, truer. "I believe you," she whispered. "And yes, Yates Harrington, I would like our arrangement to continue, not out of necessity now, but by choice." The smile that broke across Yates' face was like sunrise after the longest night. He reached up with his good arm, his hand cradling her cheek with infinite tenderness, and Rose leaned into his touch, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. "I should warn you," Yates said, his voice light though his eyes remained serious. "I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer you fine things or grand houses." "I've had those," Rose replied. "They were beautiful cages. I'd rather have a simple cabin with a man of honor than a mansion with a monster." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yates drew her closer until their foreheads touched. "I promise you this, Rose O'Malley, soon to be Harrington, if you're certain. I will never raise a hand to you in anger. I will respect you as my equal. I will protect you and your child with my life if necessary, and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust." "I know," Rose whispered, closing the distance between them to press her lips gently against his. The kiss was brief, sweet, a promise rather than a passion. Yet Rose felt it down to her soul, the beginning of something true and lasting. They were married 2 weeks later by a circuit preacher who passed through Coopersville. The ceremony was simple, attended only by the doctor who had saved Yates' life, the trading post owner and his wife, and Captain Braddock, who had returned to check on their welfare. Rose wore a new dress, purchased with money Braddock had insisted was rightfully hers from her first husband's estate. Yates, still moving carefully but healing well, wore his best shirt with a new vest the trading post owner's wife had helped Rose select. "I, Yates Harrington, take you, Rose O'Malley, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice clear and certain as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, another purchase from the trading post, which carried a surprising variety of goods for such a remote location. "I, Rose O'Malley, take you, Yates Harrington, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she replied, her heart full as she placed a matching band on his finger. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," the preacher concluded. "You may kiss your bride." Yates' kiss was gentle but no longer tentative, and Rose responded with all the emotion that had been building within her since the night he had found her bruised and desperate on the prairie. When they parted, the small gathering applauded, genuine pleasure evident on their faces. "Where will you go now?" Braddock asked during the simple celebration that followed. Yates and Rose exchanged glances, having discussed this question extensively during his recovery. "North," Yates answered. "I have a friend in Wyoming Territory who's been asking me to help manage his ranch. Says the country up there is beautiful, big sky, good grazing land, room to breathe." "And you, Mrs. Harrington," Braddock turned to Rose. "Does Wyoming appeal to you as well?" "Wherever he goes, I go," Rose replied simply. "But yes, I think Wyoming sounds perfect. A fresh start, far from Texas and its memories." They departed Coopersville the following week, their belongings loaded onto pack mules, their future uncertain but full of promise. Yates had written ahead to his friend in Wyoming, accepting the standing offer of work. The journey would take weeks, but they were in no hurry now, with no one pursuing them and the spring weather turning mild. As they rode away from the settlement, Rose felt a profound sense of peace. Her hand drifted to her stomach, where her child grew steadily. 4 months along now, the curve of her belly visible beneath her riding clothes. A child who would know only love and safety, never fear and pain. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, riding beside her. Rose smiled, the expression coming easily now. I'm thinking about names for the baby. Would you like to help choose one? The look on Yates' face, surprise followed by profound joy, warmed Rose to her core. I'd be honored, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Boy or girl? I don't know yet, Rose replied, but I have a feeling it's a boy. If it's a boy, Yates said thoughtfully, what about William after my father, or James after Captain Braddock who helped us? William James Harrington, Rose tested the name. I like how that sounds. And if it's a girl, Rose considered for a moment, what was your mother's name? Eleanor, Yates replied softly. Eleanor it is then, Rose decided. Eleanor Martha, after your mother and my friend who spoke up for me when others wouldn't. Yates reached across the space between their horses to take Rose's hand. Perfect. As they rode north toward Wyoming and their new life, Rose thought about the strange, twisted path that had brought her here. The terror of her marriage to Vernon, the desperate flight, the unexpected sanctuary with a quiet cowboy who had risked everything for a stranger. The danger they had faced together, the bond that had formed, the love that was growing between them with each passing day. She had fled Johnson City with nothing but fear and desperation. Now, just months later, she rode toward Wyoming with hope and love as her companions. A new name, a new husband who treated her with respect and tenderness, a child who would grow up knowing only safety, never fear. We're going to be all right, aren't we? She said, half question, half statement. Yates smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. More than all right, Rose Harrington. We're going to be happy. And as they crested a hill, the vast country spreading before them like an unopened book waiting to be written, Rose believed it with all her heart. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day in Wyoming Territory, Rose Harrington gave birth to a healthy baby boy. William James Harrington entered the world with a powerful set of lungs and his mother's red gold hair. Yates, who had paced outside the bedroom door throughout Rose's labor, wept openly when the midwife placed the infant in his arms. He's perfect, Yates whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed beside Rose. Absolutely perfect. Rose watched, her heart overflowing as Yates cradled her son with such tenderness. No one looking at them would ever question that this was a father with his child. The love in Yates' eyes was unmistakable, unconditional. The ranch in Wyoming had proved to be everything they'd hoped for. Yates' friend, a gruff but kind-hearted rancher named Daniel Morgan, had welcomed them warmly, providing them with a small but comfortable house on the property and giving Yates significant responsibility in running the operation. Rose, with her education and head for figures, had taken over the ranch's books, freeing Daniel to focus on expanding his holdings. Their house sat on a gentle rise overlooking a meadow that blazed with wildflowers in summer. Yates had built a porch where Rose spent many evenings watching the sunset, her hands resting on her growing belly, her heart at peace. Now, as winter approached, the three of them were snug in their home. The bond between Rose and Yates had deepened over the months, growing from mutual respect and care into a love that surprised them both with its intensity. The shadows of Rose's past gradually receded, replaced by the bright reality of her present happiness. I never thought I could feel this way, Rose confessed one evening as they sat before the fire, William sleeping contentedly in a cradle Yates had crafted. This, complete, Yates took her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Nor I thought my life was set solitary, simple. Then you stumbled into it and showed me everything I was missing. Rose leaned against his shoulder, reveling in the simple comfort of his presence. Do you ever regret it? Leaving Texas, your cabin, everything you knew? Never, Yates replied without hesitation. I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Besides, I didn't leave everything. I brought the most important parts with me, my books, my carving tools, and eventually you. Rose smiled, remembering how Yates had arranged for his belongings to be shipped north once they were settled. The familiar volumes now lined shelves in their home, and his whittling knife still created small wooden animals that would one day be William's toys. I received a letter today, Rose said after a comfortable silence. From Martha Jenkins. Yates raised an eyebrow in interest. How did she find you? Captain Braddock forwarded it, Rose explained. She writes that Johnson City has changed since Vernon's death. Many of his businesses have been sold, and the new bank owner is apparently a fair man. She hesitated. She also mentioned that some of the women in town have established a home for those escaping difficult situations. They've named it Rose's Haven. Yates' arm tightened around her shoulders. That's a fitting tribute. I never expected to leave any kind of legacy there, Rose mused. I was just trying to survive. Sometimes, Yates replied thoughtfully, it's the battles we fight for ourselves that end up helping others the most. Your courage gave them permission to find their own. William stirred in his cradle, making the small snuffling sounds that preceded waking. Rose moved to tend to him, lifting him gently and settling back beside Yates. I've been thinking, Yates said as he watched Rose nurse their son, his expression one of profound contentment. Now that William's here and we're established, would you like to make this place truly ours? Daniel mentioned he's willing to sell us this section of the ranch. It's good land, with the creek running through it. We could build something bigger than this house if you wanted. Rose looked around the simple home they had made together at the books on the shelves, the quilt she had stitched during her pregnancy, the wooden figures Yates had carved, the cradle holding their son. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it was filled with love and safety. It was everything Vernon's mansion in Johnson City had never been. This is perfect for now, she decided. But yes, someday I'd like a little more room, maybe another bedroom or two. She met his eyes with a smile. William might like siblings, don't you think? The joy that spread across Yates' face was answer enough, but he leaned forward to kiss her softly. I think that sounds perfect. As William nursed contentedly and the fire crackled in the hearth, Rose thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the terrified, battered woman fleeing through the dark Texas night to this, a woman with a husband who cherished her, a son she adored, a home filled with peace instead of fear. She had survived. More than that, she had found joy she'd never believed possible. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, blanketing their Wyoming home in pristine white. Inside, Rose Harrington held her son close, leaned against the strong shoulder of her husband, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The pregnant, beaten woman who had tried to leave was gone. In her place stood Rose Harrington, wife, mother, survivor, free at last and loved beyond measure.